every time, I guess not every time, but when you read the scriptures, do you ever get a sense that you can almost tell what Jesus is thinking or the emotions of the moment? Even Mark, who has very little explanation or fluff, sometimes you can really get a sense of what's going on. And I find that when I read the scripture for today, I can feel Jesus' frustration. I can almost see him just shaking his head and saying, "Oh man, will you not get this?" So here we have Jesus walking down. It's again the final days. It is getting really close to the time when they're heading towards Jerusalem. And he's again trying to avoid the crowds because he still has a lot to impart to his followers and he wants them to get it. And they just aren't. And we're fresh off of last week looking at Peter not getting the message and Jesus essentially chastising him and saying, "Stop tempting me. Get behind me. You got to understand this stuff." So here we have there's a tradition that identifies three times that Jesus tells his disciples what's going to happen. Three times they don't get it or they want to do something else. So here's the second time that we're looking at it. And maybe because they have saw what happened to Peter last time, the disciples that were talking about greatness were not asking questions. They were arguing amongst themselves like complaining teenagers. Imagine the road trip and the minivan is full of people who don't get along, don't understand the process, don't understand where they're going, and just don't know how to listen to the instructions that they're being given. So Jesus is trying to explain to them again, like, look, this is going to happen. And they're bickering among themselves, and finally he says, what's going on? And the disciples tell him, the two that are bickering, tell him they want to be the greatest. They want to be with him. Now, again, this could just be the writer trying to really amp up what's going on, or this could really have been part of the oral tradition, the oral history that the writer of Mark got. Either way, it's a frustrating moment for Jesus. He has just explained it 2 or 3 times, and they're not listening. It's not even that they're not getting it, they're not listening to the message. Jesus tries to explain again that whoever wants to be first, and believe me, that's no contest. We know that. The disciples haven't figured that out yet. Whoever wants to be first has to be last. There's a running gag that has people going to the foot of the table. If they're going to be last, then they might as well step themselves there so they can move up. Guaranteed that they're actually going to be first, but they'll just position themselves in the last place. That's not the point. You know, the God that kind of created the universe can see through that. When we're talking about being the last, this is straight up servanthood. This is social justice stuff. This is putting your own interests aside because someone else is in greater need. This is looking around your world and seeing where can I make a difference. We talked last time about Peter and the pick up your cross, and the cross is not meant to be the actual literal cross that Jesus and so many others were crucified on. Cross is meant to be a metaphor, a reference to your cause. Pick up that thing, do that thing that is going to be hard, but you're called to do it. Everything about you is put together to make that happen. That's the same as what's going on here. Jesus is just trying to explain it in a different way. You have to be last. You have to be willing to put yourself in a subservient setting. You have to be willing to lift up everybody else around you. Because there's way too many people that are rushing to the front. We talk about leadership. There's a few organizations that I'm part of, and we talk about leadership. One of the fastest things anybody does is they'll create an org chart, or they will talk about all the other things that they have led in the past. It doesn't matter what you've accomplished in the past. It doesn't matter what you have done, what you have studied. When it comes to putting yourself last, putting yourself in that position, it's not with an eye to ultimately being put first. Leadership actually comes from below. And this is something that is so not grasped by the capitalist society that we live in. When we put ourselves on the top of any organizational chart, even if it's just for expedience, we have to recognize that it's not that people are going to follow us because we have all the answers. It's not because we don't have to do any work because we're already there in the first place. It's not because we get to now dictate and what's happening. We put ourselves in leadership positions. We are there to lift up everybody who is working with us. I don't like the language of above and below because it really offsets the what's going on. But if you put yourself and you talk about yourself as below, that's a different energy altogether. I've mentioned before in the, an event I was part of, the leadership team of several years ago. We were all asked to do an org chart, and I intentionally put myself at the bottom, and there was some flack about that, about what was going on. But that's truly how I see leadership. It's how everybody should see leadership. We are gifted people who have charisma, who have authority, who have vision. We're gifted with those things, but that does not mean that we're not supposed to listen to someone else, or does not mean that we don't include other people who might have different visions and different senses of what's going to happen. When Jesus is talking about, if you're going to be first with me, if you're going to be standing there with me, you've got to be willing to put yourself last. It means you've got to be willing to get dirty. You've got to be willing to lift up everybody else. You be the one in the muck so you can hold up everybody else so they can do what they need to do. Everybody has something to contribute. We're called to be that person that holds up each other. It's simple, and yet it's so hard to do, because in order for us to be last, to be at the bottom, we often have to just get out of the way and let someone else shine who might not have before. In turn, everybody else around us has to take their turn lifting up the bottom. There's a game that is played in a lot of teenage events where they all kind of rest on each other, and as each moves, they push each other up. It's fun, it's tangled, it's ridiculous. There's always a literal weakest link in all of this. They fall down, they laugh. They're teenagers, they bounce. But the message in that game is we can all lift each other up, or we can all collapse if someone doesn't do their part. That's all Jesus was trying to tell them. And then he brought a child into the center. Children are glamorized in many ways and ignored and forgotten in so many other ways. In Jesus' day, for sure they were ignored. They had no political standing, they had no social standing. They were just little people, little adults, until they grew into big adults and actually could have a job and could contribute somehow. In fact, the concept of children is a relatively recent philosophy when it comes to that. Teenagers are even more recent. But the concept of children is not really that old. So in Jesus' time, children having a value in and of themselves was just not a thing. And I mean, you loved your family, you loved the children you brought in, but it was always an eye on to, is this going to help with an alliance? Is this going to be more mouths to feed or more mouths to help? Is this person going to be allowed to be in our business? What is going to happen with this person? In the Roman culture of the day, it was not unheard of for them to leave children on the side of the road that were not wanted. Christians had a reputation of going around and picking them up and taking them back home. But childhood as a whole was not valued. And Jesus brings a child into the middle of this. Random child, there's no significance there. We don't know that they're connected to anybody at all. They could have just literally been on the road. And he says, unless you're prepared to be like this child, you're never really going to know God. So many people have interpreted that as if you're willing to be childish or leave yourself in ignorance, not ask questions, have a kind of grade 1 level, kindergarten level understanding of faith, and that's all you need. And that's not that at all. When Jesus is talking about be like a child, some of it's the faith of a child, the exuberance of a child, the honesty of a child. But it's also put yourself in a position where you are valueless in society, where you do not come in with an identity, with power, with anything else that can kind of take over what's going on. Put yourself in that position, and then you'll have a better idea of what it is to connect to God, what it is to hear God's voice, to really, really understand the servanthood that Jesus is trying to teach us. It might not be easy, but it is so rewarding to be there to hold others up. I like kudos. Everybody likes kudos. It's a wonderful thing to be praised for something you've done, but it is even better to watch someone else get their recognition and their honor. We as a congregation, we as a church, need to be doing more of that, lifting people up. The conversation of who is the greatest completely misses the point. Are we ready to be vulnerable, make ourselves invisible, and serve others the way Jesus has asked us to do and the way Jesus showed us to do?